What are we listening to today?
The Immigrant Project by Girish and Astha.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Immigrant Project. And I feel like we are doing a series with professionals, lawyers. And today we have Steven Tress with us joining. Steven, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
For those who do not know Steven, I'm sure a lot of you might know him because he's a very, very well known lawyer in Toronto. But Steven has around 35, 36 years of experience practicing law. He is an immigration lawyer and a criminal lawyer. And he graduated from Osgood Hall Law School back in the 80s.
Thank you.
Did I butcher your
Yeah,
back? No?
no, that's great.
It's
Yeah.
great.
Makes me sound like an old man, but sure, thanks.
No, you sound
Remember
like,
the 80s? Yeah.
sound like a veteran in the industry.
Oh, thank
So
you.
we are grateful to have you, Stephen.
Thank you.
So, guys, Stephen and I, off camera, we were talking about a recent poll where a lot of Canadians said that they don't really appreciate the number of immigrants that are coming to the country. Now, being a lawyer who operates in this industry, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, apart from the family reunification programs and the humanitarian programs, all of our other immigration programs are economically driven. So the federal government holds consultations with stakeholders such as employers, people in the Canadian labor market to identify labor market shortages. And pretty much all of our other immigration programs, apart from family reunification, sponsorship, and humanitarian, are economically driven. So it's not about what Canadians feel. It's about our economy.
It's about what matters to the economy.
Right.
You spoke about economic immigration. You also spoke about labor market.
Yes.
So there's something called as LMIA.
Yes.
And I realized that government has implemented a recent restrictions on LMIA. Now, I don't know how that affects industries like agriculture, construction, where we need a lot of people, where we need immigrants,
Right.
and where government has these restrictions. So what do you think is the agenda of the government in this,
Right.
and where
Well,
are we going with this?
So again, the temporary foreign worker program is continually fine-tuned according to both national, provincial, regional, and sector needs. So they have consultations with certain groups. And so, for example, if the unemployment rate is below 5%, you know, that usually signals a labor shortage. Where if it's over 5%, then we don't have a labor shortage, and that is region by region and sector by sector. So the recent policy changes, or all the policy changes, are really meant to address the labor shortages.
Wow. Okay, let's look at this from a macroeconomic lens, Stephen.
Okay.
And you spoke about unemployment levels. So the current unemployment levels in Canada stands at around 6.6%.
Right.
And a lot of people are saying, a lot of politicians are also saying that immigration is to blame for that. And because of that, of course, they have put in restrictions of 1 year limit, etc., etc. They're also
That's not the reason for the policy changes are not addressing, you know, people's sentiment about blaming newcomers
It's
to
not,
Canada.
yeah.
All right, it's not about that at all. And the national unemployment rate is not it doesn't have the resolution to address Canada's economy. So the federal government, I don't think any country just says, you know, okay, well, our national unemployment rate is too high, therefore, you know, we're going to take this national step. Right? They like to look at sectors individually. They like to look at regions individually. So in agriculture, for example, there might be a labor shortage, right? But in IT at the moment, maybe there isn't. Or maybe there is a labor shortage in certain regions or certain provinces or certain territories, but maybe not downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver, right? So, you know, the Canadian public, you know, and I'm not an economist.
Yes.
Right. And the Canadian public, you know, that isn't born with the knowledge. Right. So you leave economics to the experts, and the federal government has an army of economists behind immigration policies.
Okay, let's talk about immigration in general for a second. Now, a lot of countries out there envy the way we manage our immigration system, especially how we have a very developed, points-based, merit-based system as compared to some other countries that have like a raffle in this
Right.
immigration system. So,
Right.
what are your thoughts on that, and how good or bad it is to be a lawyer in working in this industry, in this
Right.
country.
Right. Well, I mean, I could think of it from two different perspectives. All right. So prior to 2015,
Okay.
anybody who met a certain number of points, 67 out of 100, would apply, and it's pretty much guaranteed that they're going to get PR.
Hmm.
Right. This kind of failed to address the nuances of the Canadian economy. So the government of the day back in 2015 introduced the express entry system, where they controlled through draws
Yeah.
the number of newcomers that can apply for permanent residence. But rather than having a lottery like the United States or other countries, which is random, Canada decided to invent this convoluted comprehensive ranking system, CRS, comprehensive ranking system, that gives weighted points to education, employment, and other factors that are meant to gauge how well the person can contribute to Canadian society and the Canadian economy.
But this is also ridiculed with a lot of paperwork.
With
The immigration system of Canada, the express entry. There's so many documentation. I mean, I went through.
Well, as a lawyer, I don't mind.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, you buy a house, right? And there's hardly any paperwork. You hire a searcher to make sure that nobody else owns the property, that there are no liens or mortgages, right? But you still have to have a lawyer, right? And it's a requirement, not in immigration law. You don't have to have a lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? But when you buy a house, which is so easy, I mean, anybody can just do it online. The title searches are all on government websites, and they're all open to the public. And I mean, I can train a student out of high school to do searches. And then we also have title insurance, which guarantees that if we screw up, the buyer or the seller, whoever's damaged, is going to get compensated by insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of friends, and I respect them, who are real estate lawyers. But the reason, even as simple as it may be, it's a huge contract, right? I mean, it's your largest investment in your lifetime.
Exactly.
So it makes sense to me as a lawyer to require a lawyer to make sure that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted, because the consequences are pretty serious, right?
Course,
Could be millions of dollars.
Life savings are going.
Right. And regardless of the absolute number, right? 50,000 could be the down payment, could be the person's life saving. Worked for 30 years in the coal mines, or as a lawyer, whatever, So it always strikes me as odd that the other most important decision, such as being reunited with your spouse, right? Or bringing your elderly parents to Canada, right? Or applying to move your entire family to a new country and find a job and become reintegrated in a foreign country, and they don't. It's the biggest decision of their lives, and yet it's not required to have a lawyer. I don't understand why somebody would take the risk and say, "Oh, I'm just going to fill out all of these 13 forms myself, and if I get it, I get it, and if I don't get it, I don't get it."
Yeah.
Well, maybe. Right?
Yeah.
But so I compare it to real estate, right? And it is complicated. It's more complicated than real estate, and yet it's not required to have a lawyer. Fine. If I were going to a country, if I were immigrating to the United States or any other country, no matter, and even with my 36 years of experience in Canadian immigration, I would still hire a lawyer to do the paperwork for me, right? I would hire a U.S. lawyer or a lawyer in the country I want to move to. The system. You make sure it gets done right. Yeah.
So guys, what Steven is trying to say is you have to uproot your life from one country and you're coming to Canada. So I think having a lawyer is a must. Like, you're making such a big.
Well, as a lawyer, I would
advocate for that.
I would advocate for that, and I would personally hire a lawyer to immigrate to another country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I wanted to.
Steven,
I love my country. Don't get me wrong.
We love Canada too. That's why we are advocating for economic immigration in this country.
Sure.
So I wanted to ask you, we see a lot of these research reports out there that talk about trend, and and they usually take data from a lot of Canadians. I mean, local Canadians without who do not have, say, a legal expertise, such as you. So I wanted to understand from you. You have been in the space for 36 plus years. How has the trend in immigration changed over this 36 years, especially after the advent of express entry system? What are the kind of applications you used to see previously versus the applications you see now? And has this new online express entry system helped us
Right.
in any way?
Right. So I actually started my thought on that as a Canadian taxpayer.
Hmm.
I was happy to see the express entry system because it geared towards improving the economy in my own country. As a lawyer, it's like, crap, we're going to get less clients now. But, I mean, apart from that, sort of on a holistic level,
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea, not only from my perspective as a Canadian citizen or a Canadian resident, but also for the newcomer.
Okay.
Because one of the problems before the express entry system is that, as I mentioned, you hit your 67 points, you get your permanent resident status, you come to Canada, you can't find a job, you can't find a house. I mean, you're lost, right?
Yeah.
And then you go on social assistance because you can't support your family, and so there was a disconnect between the numbers of newcomers we were letting in the country and the capacity of Canada to allow all those people to successfully establish themselves here,
Hmm.
right? So, in order to avoid that kind of hardship on the newcomer and any negative impact on our labor market, the express entry system was meant to match those two to ensure that newcomers can successfully establish themselves upon arrival, at least within 6 months upon arrival.
And do you think it's been 9 years since the express entry system has been, implemented? Do you think Canada was able to reach that capacity of, having the number of people in the country and also providing them with the necessary resources, including jobs, to balance out the immigration?
Right. So, well, that's kind of an economic question, and
Sort of.
yeah, and it involves other factors
Hmm.
that I'm completely unqualified to delve into. I do think, though, that that the purpose of and the intention of the express entry system is to continually fine tune with the draws,
Hmm.
right? Because we don't know what the cap is going to be,
Yeah.
and the cap is just they don't set the cap. They set the number of people that they're going to choose from the pool
Oh.
from the top down. So the federal government will say, all right, we need X number of IT specialists. We need 700 IT specialists.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a draw. This wasn't at the beginning, but this is in recent years, right? So that's how the express entry system was fine tuned through the draw system. So we're going to have a draw. We're going to select 700 IT specialists in the pool, right? And then after they count 700, you look at from the top, right? You look at what the last score is, and then that they call that the cap.
Cap, yeah.
Right? But a lot of people think that the cap is just arbitrarily chosen. No, it's the number of people that they select that are chosen, and the cap just happens to be where down the list the CRS score falls.
Yeah. Hmm.
So to, I guess, more directly answer your question, I think the draws do accomplish that kind of fine tuning.
They do.
And it's in real time. And you don't have to pass any special pilot projects or regulations or ministerial instructions. It's just, well, the ministerial instructions, just, type it out and post it.
Yeah.
But you don't have to go through any kind of committees or anything like that. It's in real time. Let's have a draw. We need X number from this sector. Let's do it. And then they publish it and they send out the invitations to apply.
Awesome. Okay, I want to spend some time talking about the influence of federal government and the influence of provincial government in the immigration system. At the same time, I want to break this question into two parts. First of all, if an immigrant from a foreign country wants to move to Canada and they want to take the PNP system, how do they go about it? That's one. And the second question is, do you think the involvement of provinces in a system like the immigration system is beneficial for the countries?
Do I think?
economic
Sorry, what was that?
is it beneficial for the country's economic immigration involvement or the influence of
You
a
mean
province?
okay,
Province,
right?
because a lot of other countries, only the federal government manages immigration for them, especially the U.S. I mean,
Right. Okay. So, firstly, it's difficult to make that comparison between Canada and United States or Canada and a European country. Nobody has their system. Okay.
Okay, yeah,
Right.
that's
So
true.
in the United States, they have a different constitutional republic where the states have certain powers and the federal government has certain powers, and we have our own constitution where the federal government has certain powers and the provinces have certain powers.
Yeah.
All right. So, and the constitutions are totally different. Right. So, I can speak to, what's going on between the provinces and the federal government in the lifetime of my career.
Yeah.
So under our constitution, immigration is federal jurisdiction. It's their domain.
Okay.
It's exclusively their domain.
Got it.
Okay. And I started actually practicing immigration law as a student at a legal clinic in 1984. And there were no provincial programs.
Back then.
Right.
Oh,
there was
okay.
nothing. The only thing that was, I think, created in the 80s, shortly after, because our charter and our constitution was created or repatriated in 1982, right? Shortly after that, Quebec started making some complaints because they are a distinct society under the constitution, and they would like the federal government to delegate some more power
Okay.
to the Quebec government to select immigrants.
Hmm.
All right. So the federal government in negotiations with Quebec, and they were the first ones to pipe up and say, we're a distinct society. We have distinct needs.
Wow.
Let us play a part in this. So the federal government entered into an agreement with the Quebec government that the Quebec government can issue CSQs, which Certificate Sélection du Québec.
What are CSQs?
Certificate Sélection du Québec.
Okay.
It's the equivalent of the nominee certificate.
PNP nomination.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Right. But they were the first.
Wow. Okay.
Right.
1982, you said.
It was in the 80s. Sometime
80s,
in the 80s where, it was 40 years ago. I'm trying to remember exactly what, but Quebec was the first one, and no other provinces had any input in our immigration laws, immigration selection whatsoever. And I don't remember what it was. Sometime in my career, in the middle of my career, the other province were saying, "Okay, why is Quebec so special? I mean, shouldn't we have some say in who comes to our provinces because we have our own microeconomy, that we have to manage, and we have economic policies, and we have to provide healthcare to newcomers, and we have to provide social services and education and jobs." And you see, so the federal government is saying, "Yeah, okay, let's enter into some negotiations." So then the federal government entered into negotiations, province by province by province.
Oh, so that's how the provinces got their power.
That's the evolution of the PNP system. And so now it's considered, it's almost seamless, right? It's still the federal government that issues the visas, right?
Yeah.
All the provinces is, if you approve it, we'll take it.
So I need 100 IT people in my province, so they'll reach out to the federal government, and then.
Well, the provinces already have their agreements, and so they have their programs. So every province now has their own immigration department, right? And then they set up their own PNPs, and I mean, I don't know what goes on behind closed doors between the provinces and the federal government when they're changing their programs, but the point is to give the provinces some say in managing their own economies. So that's what happened. So the original, and this goes to the second part of your question, the original intention of both the Quebec CSQ and the rest of the provinces and territories, the nomination certificates, the purpose of that was for the provinces wanted to make sure that the prospective newcomer is indeed going to live and work in their province what they said they were going to do on the application.
Hmm.
And because a lot at the beginning, there was a lot of abuse,
Yeah.
right? They would apply to Nova Scotia, and then as soon as they get their PR, they would move to Ontario or BC or some other province,
Of course,
right?
yeah, because they had more
Right.
jobs, more
Right. So
opportunities.
originally, when a client would come to me, the requirements included demonstrating to the province
Yeah.
that they have a connection to that province. Did you go to school here?
Oh,
Did you have a work permit here at some point? Do you have a brother, sister,
wow.
family members? Right? Because they want to make sure that there's some anchor, that there's some history. Right?
Exactly. Wow.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And even today, if let's say there was a student who went to university in Toronto, got a job in Toronto, has family in Toronto, or anywhere in Ontario,
Yeah.
doesn't matter, and they applied to Saskatchewan PN, they're not going to be
Then,
approved,
yeah,
right? Because the
they can't
Saskatchewan
prove strong
government,
ties.
yeah, the Saskatchewan government has no confidence that this person is going to live in Regina instead of Toronto, right? So you have to be careful, and the programs are changing all the time. So you always have to keep up to date with it. If a client is interested in a particular province, you have to say why that province, right?
Hmm.
And if the answer is because it's the easiest route to PR, no, that's not good.
Oh.
Don't say that to IRCC or the province, right?
They'll not give
That's
it.
not what it's for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Regina, did they change their name recently, or did I read that news wrong? I thought they were changing the name of the city.
I haven't heard that. Why would they do that?
I don't know. I just read it
It
somewhere a
means
couple of days back.
because we have a king now instead of a queen, so they want to change it to Rex.
I don't
Rex, Saskatchewan instead of Regina. Oh, I don't know.
I don't know if whether the news was
Yeah.
factually correct or not.
I've been working on some federal court applications, so I haven't been watching CNN lately or
CBC.
CP24, CBC. Yeah.
I have a question for you, Steven. It's about entrepreneurship. Now, let me paint a hypothetical picture here. I live in Germany, and
Right.
I have a business of manufacturing shoes, for instance, and I want to move my business to Canada. First of all, in your legal expertise and your experience, do you think Canada provides that environment to come to welcome a entrepreneur to the new country and provides them with the necessary support to establish their business?
Right.
And second, is it easy for them to do it?
Right. So you see the problem with hypothetical questions, right, is that there's no way enough information about the entrepreneur in order for, so we do an intensive consultation process, right? I mean, just some basic, I mean, you can make it up, but that's not going to, it's not going to be useful, right? Where do you want to set up your business?
Ontario.
So you've been here. Have you done research? What kind of market research have you done? Do you have a location in mind? What are the lease requirements? How much is it going to cost you to set up shop? How many employees are you going to use? And then we have to also work it back to what their business is currently, how many employees. Every case is different. I'm not going to do an assessment on a hypothetical situation because there are just 1,000 questions that I need to ask.
Let me answer your question. The reason I pose this hypothetical question is a lot of students, or I would say a lot of potential immigrants, they plan to move to Canada, but their pathways are limited. So they don't speak that well, English that well. So they can't come as a student. They don't have family ties. So the only option they look, which is probably the easiest way for them, is through a business visa. They are ready to invest money. They're ready to bring whatever business they have, but they're just trying to find pathways to move to the country.
Mm-hmm.
So I am trying to address this particular population group.
Right. So
because we do have our listeners who are such, who don't
Right.
speak that well,
Right.
English that well.
Well, if their intentions are bona fide, that they want to set up a legitimate business and that they can legitimately make a go of it, then they would have had to have done some market research, because if they're just using the business to immigrate and they don't care if the business lives or dies, right? That's not going to work, right? A lot of these programs in every province, there is no federal entrepreneur program anymore. There hasn't been since the I don't know, before 2012, there are only provincial entrepreneur programs. Okay. There's a startup visa. That's not an entrepreneur program.
Okay. That's separate.
Yeah, that's somebody, it's an angel investor. They're not using their own money.
Oh.
That's a different thing. But you're talking about they have a business, they want to move their business to Canada. That would be under one of the provincial nominee programs. So it would depend on whether or not that business meets that province's needs, right? It's not about finding a pathway for him. It's about finding a pathway for the province to gain their talent, right? And yeah, so the more likely successful applicant is someone who has done some research and can satisfy immigration that their business is going to be successful, that it's going to meet the needs of the program, of the provincial program, and that it's going to do what it's intended to do. Right?
So there's a lot of research that needs to go. You just wake up one day.
So remember what I said at the beginning when they were setting up these provincial programs. They were concerned that the person's not going to set up their business or not going to, right? So one of the ways that they police this is they say, okay, well, we're not going to give you the nomination certificate now. We're going to give you a work permit for a couple of years. And we're going to see how the business is.
Yeah.
And if we don't like it, we're not going to give you the nomination certificate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's not about, I want to find any pathway to come to Canada, right? I mean, that's not how I approach things.
Have you had clients like such where they got only work permit and
sure.
Oh, you
did?
did?
And they set up business and
And then they got
lots. Sure. But PNPs these programs have been around for years and years now.
Yeah.
Right? No. I was just sort of going back to the good old days, when there was no provincial programs, although it's not the good old days.
Wow. I wanted to talk to you about law for a bit.
Sure.
So again, a lot of the listeners on our show, they are either temporary residents or permanent residents in Canada, and they are considering whether they should become citizens or not. So again, in your legal expertise and experience, are there any benefits? I mean, I know apart from voting, I guess you can't vote, and you can't use the Canadian powerful visa to travel to a lot of countries. What else is it that you don't get if you are a permanent resident versus a citizen?
Right. So a permanent resident has certain obligations and responsibilities that citizens don't have. Right. So the big one is the residency obligation. So as a permanent resident, you must physically be present in Canada, subject to some exceptions, but you must be physically present in Canada for a minimum of 730 days in any 5-year window.
Okay.
It's a moving window. All right. So if immigration, if you apply for something and they find a 5-year window where, so there's that. And Canadian citizens don't have that. So Canadian citizens, they can leave, they can stay outside of Canada as long as they want, they can come back. They may never come back, or they may come back to retire, or they may not come back, but they're citizens who were born abroad, who inherited Canadian citizenship, they can come back, right? So a permanent resident can't pass on their permanent residence by birth, right, to a person born abroad. Right?
Oh, they can?
They cannot.
They cannot. Okay.
Right? A permanent resident. If a permanent resident, gives birth to a child overseas, that child is not automatically a permanent resident. But if a Canadian citizen gives birth to a child overseas, that child, subject to some exceptions, is automatically a Canadian citizen.
Wow.
Right. So that's one benefit. So freedom of movement. So you can leave the country as long as you want, and you can pass on your citizenship to your children. And then the other thing is that, some people, unfortunately, and as a criminal lawyer, get in trouble with the law, right? No matter what crime you're convicted of, if you're a Canadian citizen, they can't deport you. Right?
Oh, yeah.
But they can deport a permanent resident.
They can?
Sure. Right? They could deport a permanent resident even without a conviction. If there's reason to believe that the person is involved in organized crime. And when I say reason to believe, I don't mean proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and I don't even mean balance of probabilities. I mean reasons to believe.
Just accusations.
Well, it has to be reasonable grounds. So it's a
Reasonable.
test. It's a test that's lower than balance of probabilities, but it's higher than reasonable suspicion. Okay. Anyway, all I'm saying is that there are several grounds under the inadmissibility sections that apply to permanent residents that don't apply, of course, to Canadian citizens.
So there are a lot more benefits to become a citizen than just staying a permanent resident.
Right. But the disadvantage, which a lot of newcomers have to ask themselves, is that sometimes they come from a country that doesn't allow them to obtain a second citizenship unless they give up the first citizenship,
Yes.
right? And that's a personal decision that somebody has to make. They say, okay, so I got to follow these residency requirements and I have to make sure that I don't break the law and I'm not going to be able to pass on my citizenship to my children. But it's really important for me to maintain my my status in my citizenship in my home country for a lot of other personal reasons, right? So you got to make that that choice.
Yeah, that's a
Canada, on the
personal
other hand, doesn't care how many other citizenships you have.
Oh, you can have more than two?
You can be a citizenship of every country in the world, and Canada doesn't care, right? Yeah, they care whether or not you live and pay taxes here, but they don't care what you do. You know, if you don't reside here, right? If you're not a Canadian resident, then you don't even have to pay taxes to income that you make if you live in another country. Now, I'm not a tax lawyer, so there's a test for that, right? But yeah, Canada doesn't care what other citizenships you have.
Oh, brilliant. You spoke about, I mean, you do have experience with immigration as well as criminal law. So what percentage of your cases, if you're willing to share, overlaps?
Almost all of it overlaps.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, okay, it's like a Venn diagram. Okay, so my practice is about 50% criminal and 50% immigration, but 80% mixed. So maybe 10% of my criminal cases don't have any immigration issues attached to it, and maybe 10% of my immigration cases don't have any criminality issues. It's just because a lot of people find me because I have that mixed areas of practice, right? So someone may not find somebody with 35 years experience because they want to get a super visa for their mom. Maybe they would if there are issues, but if there are no issues, medical or criminality or other inadmissibility issues, they you can get by hiring somebody with 20 years of experience or 25 years of experience, right? So I tend to get the complex cases that have a bag of issues, a mixed bag of issues.
Mixed bag. So for if people watching this, they want to reach out to you, what are the sort of kind of cases that you prefer or you would take up?
Well, I deal with any of the sections under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, except for asylum or refugee protection cases.
Super visa, student visa, anything, you take care of all of that.
Sure.
And on the criminal, everything.
Everything except impaired driving. DUIs. I don't do DUIs.
Have you ever done those cases?
Yeah. Yes. But I decided to cut that out of my practice. Yeah.
And you have
there are a lot of lawyers out there
of course,
that do DUIs. Some lawyers specialize in DUIs and they have rates that are really, 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 really affordable. Right. So and 90 to 95% of the DUIs end up in guilty pleas anyway. And I'm a trial lawyer. Right. So if somebody wants to plead guilty, why would they pay X number of dollars per hour for me when they can pay X divided by 2 or X divided by $3 per hour for somebody else just to go to court for them and do a guilty plea, right?
Sure.
So I don't do a lot of guilty pleas. I do mostly trials.
Okay, got it. Steven, we have time for one last question, and I want to make this a very important question. What advice would you give to someone who is a law student in Canada? If there's a particular practice,
what's the question?
If there's a particular practice they should be picking, or are they even in the right, I don't know, profession?
Well, I think law is a great profession.
Okay.
And one of the great things about the legal profession is that there are so many different areas of practice.
Hmm.
It can suit a lot of tastes. So, for example, there are a lot of lawyers that don't want to go to court, but they love contracts.
Hmm.
They love making deals, with companies, the stock market, financial, because you need a lawyer in the financial field,
Yeah.
right? Banks have law
You
firms,
need lawyer in everything.
pretty much,
Everything.
right?
All the
So,
industries.
if somebody, and I do have a student program, and I'm involved with University of Toronto's Pre-Law Society and Career Day, and that, and I before the pandemic anyway, I used to have 5 or 6 students per semester for shadowing or for credit.
Wow.
Yeah, and a lot of times the students would ask me advice about either going to law school, or they're already in law school, or they're looking for an articling job, right?
Yeah.
And my first question would always be, well, why did you apply to go to law school? What was the thing? What was that aha moment, right? And if somebody said, well, my parents forced me, then I got nothing to say. But if somebody said, well, and then we would explore that.
Yeah.
And then we would sort of delve into how a legal career can serve what your interest is. So some people might have environmental interests,
Yeah.
right? Some people might have
Exactly.
scientific interests. I have a science background, actually. So my original goal was to use legal skills in the science field, and but I started working for a clinic representing immigration clients, and I kind of fell in love with it. Said, okay, there's a lot of science people out there, but this is humanitarian, and I did
Yeah.
enjoy it. And in criminal law,
You're doing God's work, honestly.
well, I don't know, but even with criminal law, I mean, I get a lot of clients who get wrongfully charged,
Oh.
wrongfully accused, and that's why I'm a trial lawyer. Because the Crown has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and I feel I'm doing something to protect the rights of someone who is facing the criminal justice system alone, right? And I'm there to guide them through the legal quagmire of everything, and make sure that their rights are protected. The right to a fair trial, the right to impartiality, those all those great things we have in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Yeah, so I gave up the science field, but I have a lot of former classmates who are active in science or IT or IP. It's IP is huge. It's a legal field. Like it's a whole legal field.
Intellectual property, right?
Yeah, and especially with the advent of computers in the 80s,
Yeah.
right? It's a huge thing, right? So yes,
So this field will never get boring.
I no, and I do enjoy spending time with my students and trying to figure out, why they're doing this and what they would want to do, and then I might be able to provide them some guidance or point them to some resources, or even refer them to some colleagues of mine who do practice in those areas and do an interview with them. Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
I love your answer, Steven. I mean, you definitely are making a meaningful change to this industry and to the system.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. It's kind of why I decided to drop science and go into law.
That's what I got from all your answers. I mean, you're so passionate about the industry. You're passionate about helping people out.
I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Steven, this has been fantastic, and for our listeners out there, if they ever want to reach you, how should they be contacting you?
My website has my contact information, steventress.com. It's just my name.com.
Wow.
I set up,
No.
I registered my website in the early .com days.
Wow. In the
Before-
90s.
Yeah, early 90s actually. Before now we have, the immigrationspecialist.ca. There wasn't even a .ca at the time. It was a new thing. So I thought, like back then, the trend was to register a website with your name, right? And in fact, my business name is Steven Tress, barrister and solicitor.
Wow.
I don't use any fancy, marketing names. I just use my own name. And so my website is steventress.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steven, for being
Sure.
a guest on the show.
Okay.
Absolutely enjoyed the conversation.
Happy to hear that. I enjoyed being here, and thank you so much for inviting me. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.